Hello, and welcome to episode 21 of the Two Button Crew podcast. Today we are doing a deep dive on Shovel Knight Treasure Trove. Specifically, the newest release of King of Cards, but we're going to hit it all. That's what we like to do at Two Button Crew. I'm Scott. I am joined by Simeon and Glenn. How are you guys?
Doing good.
Doing well. How are you?
Doing great. No technical difficulties whatsoever. TBC is known for just smooth running, especially with technology.
Yes.
Yeah.
Every time. I don't think we've ever had a mishap, especially when it comes to recording audio.
I can't think of any. Well, we've got a great game to talk about today, Shovel Knight. It is one of the only successful Kickstarter stories, at least the best one that I can think of.
Yeah.
And one of the original. A great indie game that has built itself an amazing reputation. And it's really more than a game. It's a series at this point. Started out as a Kickstarter project. They wanted to make a platformer game that was inspired by some of their favorite experiences from the old days of NES and maybe even Genesis. What do you guys notice about the inspirations of Shovel Knight, the kind of different games and genres that they pulled from?
I notice a lot of influence from Mega Man specifically, not just in platforming. I think platforming is a portion of it, but especially the music and the graphical style.
Yeah, they actually had one of some of the songs were composed by one of the composers from the classic Mega Man games, right?
I think I might have heard that before.
Yeah,
I would not
think
be surprised at all.
Treasure Knight stage, the Iron Whale, I think, was composed by one of the Mega Man composers.
Okay.
I was really pleased to see them pull that in because not a lot of video games take inspiration from Mega Man. You see a lot of references to Mario and Zelda and whatnot, but the whole 8-boss setup and everything, loved it.
Yeah, there's some inspiration, obviously, from like the DuckTales game as well, with the pogo mechanic, at least in classic Shovel Knight, not necessarily the other ones. But yeah, it's clearly pulling a lot from the classic NES, I don't know what to call it, canon, so to speak.
Yeah. The developers actually talk about that mechanic coming from Zelda 2.
Oh.
Really?
Yeah.
Okay. I was going to say DuckTales as well, but I did not know that they were specifically.
Yeah, I never got far enough into Zelda 2 to get that ability, so I don't associate it with that.
Yeah.
Yeah, they definitely talked about doing gameplay first, which is something Nintendo loves to develop with in mind, but it's nice to see Yacht Club Games do that. And by the way, that developer is kind of the remnants of some people that left WayForward, I believe. Mm-hmm. So
you say that like WayForward closed down or something.
Yeah.
I mean, there's definitely a split.
Yeah, I don't think I've never heard anything about it not being amicable though. I think they just wanted to go off and do their own thing.
Yeah, you can read a good story about it in Jason Schreier's book. He works for Kotaku and wrote Blood, Sweat, and Pixels, which is 10 chapters. Each chapter is the story of a different game's development, and one of them is Shovel Knight. Yeah, pretty insightful.
Yeah. Now, interesting thing is Shovel Knight definitely, while it is very much in the NES aesthetic, it actually does take some liberties with it. So it is kind of interesting for me because I like knowing what those technical limitations are playing it. Like it has parallax scrolling and in the backgrounds, and there are many, many shades of yellow visible on screen. Which is, if you know the NES's graphical capabilities, it actually could not do true yellow.
I didn't know that it couldn't do true yellow. I know that it had like a nasty like brown yellow, and they use that a lot.
Yeah, there's like this kind of orange, goldish maybe color.
So I think that this project is definitely the perfect example of feature creep. They launched with a Kickstarter, said they wanted to make this, nice little charming indie game, but did a lot of stretch goals because the funding really picked up in the back half and just tens of thousands of dollars kept pouring in. So they said, we'll make a campaign for 3 other bosses. And each time they went to work on one of those campaigns, they wanted to put in new gameplay, new ideas, things that they weren't able to include in the original. And it just kept getting bigger and bigger to where they were actually standalone indie games. So I remember this kind of shift when they put out a press release. That was like, we're going to actually have to sell these things. But I think they did it in a really clever way to at least appease the original Kickstarter backers by giving it away for free. Shovel Knight became Shovel Knight Treasure Trove, which would include everything. And the only thing that I think backers got a little burned on is they only got the new updates on their original platform of choice, which became a generation old over the development of this series. But so that's kind of the case for you, right, Simeon? Everything's coming in on your 3DS?
Right. Yeah, I've had to play pretty much everything on my 3DS up until now, which I got Shovel Knight Showdown on Switch.
Nice.
And since I'm connected to your Nintendo account, I can, if I can find a place where I can get Wi-Fi, I can download the rest of the titles. But yeah, other than, of course, Shovel Knight Showdown, which is not available for 3DS.
Right, because it's local multiplayer only, and I mean, they could have made that work with wireless download, but man, that would be a lot of development and resources for an old platform.
Yeah, and I honestly don't mind it that much. Like, it's kind of a pain to get my 3DS out, but whenever I do, I mean, it's just, basically taking it out of the box, plugging it in, and playing, which is a blast every time.
What are you playing Shovel Knight on, Glenn?
I play it on my Wii U because that's what I initially got it on. I got it on like 50% off on a sale, and so every time a new update comes out, I just boot up the Wii U.
Nice. Do you use your Wii U for anything else?
Presently, no. I've been meaning to go back and replay Pikmin 3, but I'm definitely hanging on to it because I bought those games, and I'm not the kind of guy who's like, oh, I'm going to sell all my old games and then buy the new version for the current console because I don't know if I'm ever going to go back and play those, but I like to keep them around just for the option, so it doesn't make sense economically.
The Wii U has a really nice eShop. I wonder if I should go back there and pick up some Virtual Console stuff before it gets shut down.
Yeah. Didn't you say that you were boycotting the Virtual Console like a couple of years ago on a blog? It's like, it's not transferable between devices, so I'm not going to buy from them anymore.
Oh, I'll take your word for it. Yeah, I'm not going to do that anymore. Well, that's true. Yeah, Nintendo needs to fix that. Okay. So let's get into some general impressions on Shovel Knight. Overall, I really love the whole aesthetic, the visuals, the music in the world. I think the part that stands out to me the most when I think about Shovel Knight is the animations. They put a lot of character into the animations, whether you're just opening a chest, which would be just a very simple thing in most games, but they made it so it's fun. Or I love the way King Knight opens up a platter. He's spinning on the top and unscrewing it. They put so much attention to detail. Another one of my favorites is Plague Knight. You would get to... because Plague Knight wasn't as completely original of a campaign as the other two that they made later. He was still kind of going through Shovel Knight stages. So you would see the Shovel Knight shaped doors. And I saw one of those and I thought, I'm not going to be able to go through this part. They just left it in there. But no, he contorts his body and squeezes in there and gets to go through the door, but he falls out and is clearly hurt and everything. I'm like, this is amazing.
I forgot about that. That was great.
Yeah. Props to the animators. What stands out for you two?
I've already mentioned some of the stuff visually just stands out to me because it's not 100% accurate, which I think is a good thing. They didn't feel shackled to the limitations of the era. They clearly put a lot of effort to make it look, how do I describe it? They succeeded in what I think the term is verisimilitude. it feels right, but it isn't technically correct.
Yeah.
So I appreciate that. The animations, like you said, were great. And I'll admit, the music is one of those things where it's good, but it never really resonated with me personally.
As far as it's not sticking in your head.
Yeah, it's one of those things where, at least for the original soundtrack, I think the music got better the further into the series you get, but it's one of those things where it's like, yes, this is really good. I like this music in context, but it's not one of those things where, like, when you go back and you listen to it afterwards, you're jamming out to it. That's kind of my measure of a soundtrack is, can I listen to it outside the context of the game and still find immense enjoyment from it? And it's like, again, I'm not saying it's bad by any stretch of the imagination. It's really good, but it's one of those things where it's not my first pick if I'm just going to listen to music for its own sake. Mm-hmm. But I think what really stuck out to me when I stuck a word? Stuck out. What really stuck out to me is at first is just the world. Honestly, Shovel Knight feels like the characters that you come across, and you have these like a goat in a frilly dress walking through town, and that kind of silliness is something that I think was much more common of fantasy in the 80s, because now fantasy is like, for whatever reasons, really trying to take itself seriously, and everything's just a big D&D ripoff these days. So you don't really... Fantasy doesn't have the whimsical aspect that it did back in like the 70s and the 80s. So
which D&D ripoffs really get under my skin are the Zelda ones. Man.
Oh my goodness.
Okay, so
you've never played D&D before, because I can tell you that much, because the Zelda rule system that we've been playing with is not like D&D. It's not very similar to D&D at all.
Okay, sorry, sir.
Yeah, I really appreciate that, and that's something that I wish fantasy would kind of bring back, is talking animals and silly stuff, and not everything is dwarves and elves. And if you're going to do dwarves and elves, then do them in a way that's at least somewhat original.
They're not afraid to color outside the lines.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and that's something I greatly appreciated about Shovel Knight.
I echo what both of you guys have said, and I agree with you, Glenn, on the soundtrack. I think that it's a great soundtrack, and like while I was playing it, I got a lot of like nostalgia feel, and it was really good, and it kept me like in the game, and it kept me engaged. But like I can only think of like one, maybe two tracks off the top of my head, like playing it through. Whereas like with Mega Man, like I know the whole series. Like you can play a little piece, and I know, especially the classic series, I know what stage it is from what game. But with Shovel Knight, it would be a little bit more difficult. I'd probably still be able to place it just because of the thematic aspect, but I think there was only one track that, like, besides like the plains, I think is iconic.
Mm-hmm.
And
yeah, the main theme is good, and I think the Iron Whale, which as we've already discussed, I don't think was done by Jake Kaufman. I feel bad that's like my favorite stage theme outside of the plains. Because it's the one that was done by a guest.
Yeah. The other one that stuck out to me was Tinker Knight's stage.
Mm-hmm.
Like as soon as I entered it, and I like I said, I can't think of it off the top of my head, but as soon as I entered it, I was like, this is a Mega Man song. Like this is.
I think that may have been the other one that the woman who composed. I think she did like Mega Man 3 or something. Did.
That does not surprise me at all, because I'm like, literally pick this up and put it in a Mega Man game. Nobody would know the difference. It fits perfectly. So
that's
soundtrack,
a compliment. Yeah,
soundtrack was really good. Like Glenn said, I don't know if it would stick with me beyond that. The world was amazing. The just little touches, and I haven't. I've only played through Spectre of Torment once, and I enjoyed the story. But I actually really enjoyed the story. Mm-hmm. I thought that, especially with Plague of Shadows, that it was just going to be like, oh, this is just going to be replacing Shovel Knight.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
But it kind of was in the levels a little bit, but the gameplay was very different, and the story was a lot more. And then, especially
are we talking about the story as a whole, or for that specific?
For that specific campaign.
All right. Well, we're going to get to each campaign individually, so.
Oh, I was just saying, like,
mm-hmm.
the story I expected to be kind of the same, but I appreciated that the story was actually something that I could enjoy every time in a different way.
Yeah. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Speaking of getting to those campaigns, we'll start with where it all began, Shovel of Hope. Of course, this is kind of a New Hope situation where that name was not in place when the campaign first came out, but kind of retrofitted.
Yeah, and can I just say, I don't like that. I don't like the fact that they renamed the first game. I think it should just be Shovel Knight. This is Shovel Knight. It's the base model. It's the base game. And everything else is like a sequel or a spinoff. You can't even just say, oh, well, the whole collection is Shovel Knight. No, the whole collection is Shovel Knight Treasure Trove. That was like the only part of that announcement that genuinely ticked me off.
Glenn, you are the stereotypical 50-year-old Star Wars fan. It's still Star Wars to me.
I agree, though, because Shovel of Hope, like, when people started saying Shovel of Hope and, like, I started seeing that, I'm like, what is that? Like, is that, like, a separate mode? And
yeah.
Then, like, I was like, oh, okay.
I mean, it was complicated. They had to pull it off going, we have this Kickstarter and backers, people that own something and expect to own more. Then we have the SKU we've been selling. Then we plan to start selling this other stuff. And we have to now explain what everything is. I remember we had to make a TBC episode just to sort and wrap our mind around what was what. But yes, Shovel Knight became Shovel Knight Shovel of Hope. That's the classic, the original, with the shovel-based gameplay. And I don't know exactly what to say about it on its own, because a lot of the mechanics that it introduced are reused. But I will say playing it for the first time was awesome. Felt just like at home with an NES game or something. They really thought of a lot of clever ways to use the shovel, whether you were digging up treasure, breaking blocks, using it in combat. Definitely a really versatile weapon and tool that you hadn't seen in a game before? ?
Not to the extent that you see it here, I don't think.
Not as a primary.
Not as a shovel blade.
Not your everyday carry.
No.
Yeah. I really, when I first played it, I was surprised how much I liked it. It's the controls feel really good. There's lots of collectibles and hidden passages, and the thing is, they're not like really obtuse or arbitrary in the way they're laid out. Typically, if you just have a little bit of pattern recognition, you can find secrets pretty easily, which is not to say I've found everything in the original game, but it is kind of, compared to the others, it does feel a little bit vanilla. Mm-hmm. Like the power-ups you get are pretty basic, and moving forward they would make, like, the power-ups would get a lot more eccentric, and not just like what they are, but how they work. They do much more nuanced things. Here it's just like, okay, shoot a projectile, and that's it.
Shoot an arcing projectile.
Yeah, so stuff like that. Yeah, the bouncing works. I think really my only major contention with the original Shovel Knight is some of the levels can feel really, really long.
Yeah, I definitely agree with that. I felt that in the the frozen ship stage and the propeller knights stage.
Which reminds me to talk about checkpoints. They have this really interesting system with checkpoints where you could break them if you wanted to risk that. You would get a big reward in money, but then if you died, you would have to go back to the previous checkpoint or the start of the level if you hadn't used any other ones. So I thought that was really cool as far as risk reward. And Shovel of Hope was also inspired by modern games as well, not just retro roots, but you definitely felt the Dark Souls influence where you lose your money and you have to go back and reclaim it unless it's gone forever.
And that's another thing I really appreciate is that there are no lives in Shovel Knight. That actually, I'm working on a game in my spare time, and that actually is what convinced me to not put lives in the game that I'm working on.
Oh, cool. Thank you, Yacht Club Games. Mm-hmm. So I liked that money mechanic a lot in Shovel of Hope. I think it got a little old by the time I was finishing up King of Cards, and I just pretty much stopped caring about my money and was like, I just want to beat the game. But I'm glad that at least in Shovel of Hope with these really long levels, they had plenty of checkpoints.
Yeah, as long as you're playing on the normal difficulty and not going.
I never tried any of those. Did you?
I can't remember which campaigns I did try that on. I'm pretty sure I tried it on Plague of Shadows. Spoiler alert, that was my favorite campaign. Barely. How do you guys think Shovel of Hope, we touched on it a little bit, how do you think it's aged as far as specifically against this collection? But I mean, in general, it's how many years old? 5 years old now?
Yeah.
It has been a little bit of time since I've gone back and replayed the original, but I think, based on what I remember, I think it still holds up pretty well because each chapter, each game, really does its own unique thing. And I think because Shovel Knight was the first project, it's the baseline. It actually holds up remarkably well because everything else is like trying to be something very specific, and Shovel Knight just kind of covers all the bases.
Yep, I agree.
Going back to vanilla, people say vanilla is like kind of a dismissive term nowadays, but vanilla is actually a really good flavor. Like part of the reason that people say, "Oh, it's vanilla," is because you put vanilla in everything.
Yep.
You make brownies vanilla. You make like some sort of strawberry treat vanilla. It's
I would rather have vanilla than like all of the other flavors mashed together in like some sort of like nasty Frankenstein thing. Vanilla sounds much better to me.
Yeah.
I agree. I think so. How do you think? If are they planning on doing a sequel to Shovel of Hope specifically, like where you're playing as Shovel Knight, a new campaign?
I think so, but I think it'll be at least a generation later.
Right.
As far as what they're trying to emulate with sorry, I lost the word.
Like graphically and
I think we may see
nostalgia.
A super Shovel Knight.
Mm-hmm.
That seems like the logical direction. Though they did, for April Fool's, tease a Shovel Knight 64.
They've actually been talking about that for years. They really want to do Shovel Knight in 3D.
Oh, no, it wasn't 3D. It was the Commodore 64 port.
Oh, Commodore 64.
Yeah, it was absolutely hilarious.
Yeah, I originally played Shovel of Hope on the Wii U, and I actually bought the whole package again on Switch because I wanted it more readily available. And in that gap of years between playing it on the Wii U and Switch, I was kind of remembering it as a good game, but then I played it on Switch, and I thought, oh, no, wait, this is actually excellent. Every level is amazing. and their attention to detail is top notch. So I think it aged super well, and I don't see how it will ever age badly.
Yeah, and they've actually expanded on the base game because now there's like co-op and stuff in it.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yep. All right, Simeon, why is Plague of Shadows your favorite?
Well, hang on. We didn't really talk about the story about the first Shovel Knight.
Glenn, hang on. We got to talk about the story. I really liked the story as well. I mean, especially the Shield Knight stuff. That was really the heart of the story to me. Mm-hmm. And I'm not much of a story guy in games, but I at least gave Shovel Knight the time of day to read it and appreciate it.
Yeah, I think they do a really good job of like, they keep the relationship between Shovel Knight and Shield Knight kind of ambiguous. I know a lot of people like to think that they're romantically entwined, though it's never outright stated. But you do really get that sense that Shovel Knight does care about Shield Knight throughout the story, and it does motivate you. And one of the things is that I personally like is that I like stories where the motivation for the hero is personal. Because Shovel Knight, it becomes clear the more you play it that defeating the Order of No Quarter for Shovel Knight is kind of tangential. Like his goal is to say, is like, oh, the tower's open, I can go in, I can save Shield Knight. That's ultimately his motivation. It's just Shovel Knight also happens to be a good guy, and that's one of the things that I like about Shovel Knight is he's just a good guy. But, it shows that, even a good guy can have his own motive for doing something instead of just, well, I'm going to save the world because that's the right thing to do.
Yeah.
Yep. And that's probably very important for a faceless character, someone who's wearing a helmet, to be able to relate to them on a personal level in some way, even if that's their attachments. So, by the way, what is that name? The Order of No Quarter?
Quarter means mercy.
So that's something you'd say in war, right?
Yeah.
No
quarter.
Oh, okay. I see.
And I think it's kind of a play on quarters being an arcade thing.
Yeah.
I think that was intentional.
I agree.
That or they just like the cadence of it. That's good too.
Yeah, the order and quarter.
Uh-huh.
I actually really appreciated how they did Black Knight because he, at first, you're like, oh, this is, generic bad guy that I'm going to face later.
Basically Zero. I kind of got that feeling.
Yeah.
Zero, Shadow. Yeah, but it's a common trope. I did a whole article.
But I really appreciated, like, when you got to the end, you're like, okay, Black Knight isn't, first of all, he's not like any of the other Order of No Quarter Knights. He doesn't have the same motivation. The reason he's doing what he's doing is to protect Shield Knight as well. And you see that care for him, like when there's kind of that reveal there near the end of the game. Like, or
yeah, that actually was a really cool twist where it's like a really weird thing to make a twist, but you find out like at the beginning it seems like, oh, this is this rival that you've had for a long time and that you've been butting heads forever, and then you find out at the end, no, you two were actually friends at one point.
Yep.
And you just never got the full context until the end.
Yeah, and it's not like they even have different goals. They both want to protect Shield Knight, but Black Knight has a different idea of how you need to go about that. He says, like, don't touch her at all, and then Shovel Knight is, no, we need to restore her back to what she was. So just the fact that, and then like when you leave, it's not like you bash his brains in and he dies. He is like, okay, you defeated me. I respect that. Be careful going forward. Don't hurt her. So I actually really thought that was interesting. Like when it got to that point when you beat Black Knight the second time, it's just like, whoa, there's like this is like nuanced. Like this is not what I thought it was, and it just brought like a whole new depth to it.
Yeah, so it just goes to show that even a simple story can be very effective if executed well.
Yeah.
One more thing before we move on, I just want to say this. Shovel Knight's in-game sprite looks way better than his official character design.
Yeah.
I just, that's something I need to get off my chest. Is that he's the official sprite, the sprite in the game has kind of these thin arms that I think honestly makes a much more endearing character design, while he's got like this really bulky stout look in the official art, and I much prefer kind of the weird noodle arms personally.
Yeah, I do too. I 100% agree with that.
Yeah,
Okay.
that's one of the reasons that I haven't bought the amiibo.
Yes.
Which
Oh,
is
I actually
very-
have the amiibo. I wanted to get
It's-
the co-op stuff, but then they made that so you don't need the amiibo for that. Now I just use it for the little fairy that like tries to pick up gems but can't. It's adorable. I call him Little Diggy.
It's very cool that Yacht Club took the risk and that kind of financial investment to do a physical run of amiibo, and they were the first third party to make an amiibo. And I believe the only other one by now is the Mr. Salute the Sun Dark Souls man.
Yeah, Solaire.
Yeah.
Solaire of Astora.
So
The Starlink things.
The Starlink.
Are those amiibo, or are those not technically?
I don't think they're technically amiibo. I know that
That's a
there
good
are
question.
some. I think Blizzard released some for Diablo 3, but they were just like
Oh yeah.
a remake, a recasting of a figure that they had already produced. They just turned it into amiibo.
Right. Well, that was very cool that they stepped out, and an indie company was the first one to do that. It's awesome. All right. Simeon,
Yes.
you mentioned a little while ago that Plague of Shadows was your favorite. Why is that?
I think it comes down to two things. One is control. I felt like Plague Knight was just a lot of fun to control. Like, to me, there was no way around it. I really loved the way that Shovel Knight was simple, and I loved the way that Spectre Knight felt. But both of them, I think you were relatively, I say limited, not because as like a bad thing, especially Spectre Knight. Like what you could do with the scythe was really cool, and you could use it in different ways. But the fact that you could use all these different combinations and strategize, okay, this is how I'm going to go through here, and you have your favorite combinations, and it's not just you go through and you use what you have in different ways. No, you use different tools to get through it.
Yeah.
So there was that gameplay. He was a lot of fun to control, even though the stages were very, very similar. And the other was the story. I actually really, really liked Plague Knight as a character, and seeing that he was kind of like this boss that had like power, and you felt in control. But whenever you weren't in a stage and you were just left to look at Plague Knight, who was small, and like you felt like this, like, okay, he's really not that intimidating. And I found that kind of juxtaposition kind of interesting. He's a boss and he's bossing all these people around, but he's really not intimidating. And then like he's really awkward around Mona, and he's like, I thought that romance was really cute. But just how he looked and how he acted, I found was really interesting in a character.
Can you imagine Capcom even attempting to have that kind of compelling backstory
No.
for just a random boss?
No.
Yeah. They really pulled it off.
Well, Scott, what were your thoughts on it?
I liked Plague of Shadows a lot. Simeon helped me pick the right bombs and stuff because I don't have the patience for that. I don't like options.
Yeah.
I like upgrades and being told, hey, you got a better bomb or a better casing or whatever. But when it comes to, I have to make a bunch of decisions and different combinations, almost like alchemy, which goes along well with Plague Knight. But that just wasn't for me. But when Simeon got me set on the right loadout, and I was having fun with that.
All right. I'll admit, Plague of Shadows is actually my least favorite.
Fight.
No, there's no fight there. I definitely see why Plague of Shadows wouldn't be somebody's favorite.
I found it just, well, one, I don't remember the movement feeling that good because you're kind of just exploding and then being launched in directions, and you don't really feel like you're in control that often. And I remember because of that, I spent pretty much the whole game with my thumb down on the charge button.
As a Mega Man player, I guess that didn't bother me as much as somebody who's so used to that.
Yeah, Simeon's thumb is just constantly exerting pressure, even when he's not playing games.
Yeah, see?
So I had issues with that. And I also agree with, I'm not someone who's adverse to complexity and learning nuance, but I just did not feel like it worked in the context of all of the different options with the bombs necessarily worked in the context of a side-scrolling platformer where you have to open the menu to assign your combination.
That, I think, was another advantage to playing on the 3DS, is I didn't have to open up a menu.
Okay.
I could just bloop, blob.
Yeah, I mean, I was playing on the Wii U, so I probably could have done that, but it would have been more like I would have had to actually take my eyes completely off the screen.
Right.
That's what Miyamoto wants you to do. That's why he made that.
I took some issue with some of the gameplay. I didn't think it was quite as refined as Shovel Knight, and it was also just there was a lot that kind of slowed it down. And also, I wasn't a huge fan of the story. I don't know, personally, and maybe it's just because I've gotten jaded and bitter, but I'm not a huge fan of romance as a motivating factor for a main
Happy
character.
Valentine's Day, Glenn.
Oh yeah, happy Valentine's Day.
Happy Single Awareness Day. I don't know. It's one of those things that I've seen that as a motivation for just so many stories. So it just came across as kind of I think trite is a bit too harsh of a word, but I'd seen it before.
Right.
You've seen romance before?
Well, yeah.
Whoa, that is shade. Spill that tea.
Sorry.
No, it's fine. But yeah. So the story didn't really appeal to me, and the gameplay just didn't. It felt just a little bit off. Though I was happy to see Zubaz finally find a place where he fit in.
Wait, what are you talking about?
Zubaz, he's one of the mid-bosses you can find wandering around the overworld, right? The big guy with like the face paint and the...
what's it? This is not... Did you say Zubat?
It's Golbat.
Zubaz. With a Z.
Oh, Baz.
Yeah.
Okay, I thought you said Zubat, and I'm like, what?
No, Zubaz. And he finally found a place where he can fit in. Which,
that's right.
Yeah, you can recruit him at one point, and that was really sweet. And that's one of the things I like about Shovel Knight is it does have its little sweet moments like that. But yeah, not a bad game in the least. It was still a very, very good game. Just I think it doesn't hold up to the others.
Spectre of Torment is probably my favorite, or tied with Shovel of Hope for my favorite.
Real quick before we move on, I would like to point out that Plague of Shadows was my game of the year. I think it was 2016.
Congratulations, Plague of Shadows.
Yeah, that was a rough year. Pokken Tournament was real close, but Plague of Shadows was probably the best game that I played that year.
Yeah. I'm like the most memorable moment from that was one that happened by accident for me was watching the you can like there's this one point where Mona's like dancing in the lab by herself and you get an achievement for just sitting there and watching her for a long time and it's like the achievement is like, that's not creepy at all, or something like that. And I got that by accident because I thought it was a cutscene. So it's like, okay, I'll just sit back, let this play out, and then it gives me an achievement for that. It's just like, oh, am I supposed to push a button?
Now I feel bad.
When Glenn is in court for creeping on a woman dancing alone, he's gonna say it was an accident.
A woman dancing alone in my lab.
Yeah, and they're gonna bring that that achievement up in court as evidence. This is not without precedent. Okay. Anyway,
moving on.
Spectre of Torment.
Which I always get confused with Plague of Shadows because of the name.
No, I think we should talk about this more, Glenn. So how long were you watching? All right, Spectre of Torment, one of my favorites, probably tied with Shovel of Hope for the top spot. And I think I would probably feel differently if I had bought this game on its own. I would like it to be a little more meaty for a full price, but as an expansion, as an added free DLC campaign, I loved how it was really streamlined because there was no overworld. You just went to your magic mirror on the wall and went to a level. So I was very happy with how focused it was and how I was able to just get straight into the gameplay and beat levels one by one, and it felt really good while doing so. Like you already mentioned with the scythe, and he feels very good to control, and I thought that was kind of a return to form from the overcomplicated Plague of Shadows for someone who is impatient like me.
Now, maybe I'm wrong about this. Were you able to select 8 levels at the beginning? You could play any of the levels in any order, right?
Yep.
That's so... See, that to me is almost more impressive than... Well, maybe not. Maybe it isn't. But to me, that's really cool that, like, you know, with Shovel Knight and Plague Knight, you see the progression.
Yeah.
You progress through the stages. And then with Spectre Knight, it's like, well, you could tackle any of them. And some of them might be easier, but I don't know.
And I don't remember anything about the story, so you two will have to fill me in.
Well, going to the gameplay first, I did really like the controls. It felt really good, and Spectre Knight is very mobile. My issue, though, is that it takes a lot of practice to get good with him. Like it's a very technical, very kind of finicky thing. So there's a lot of split-second timing. Otherwise, you might send yourself careening into a pit instead of flying over an obstacle. And the wall climb takes some time to get used to as well.
It does, and that actually gets triggered when you don't want it to pretty frequently.
Yeah. I really enjoyed the gameplay. As I've said, it's the simplicity, but as far as like the technicality of using those simple tools is great. And I love the tower where, you know, you're going up the elevator and there's that headless guy that's trying to murder you or whatever. I can't remember exactly. It's been a long time since I've played this, and I've only played through the campaign once, but like I loved going to that. Like you can go to that right away, and then like you only get like a little ways and you're like, oh, you know, I almost had it or whatever. You know, you think you almost had it or whatever, and then you like play a few more levels and then you go back and you see how the levels have progressed your skills and how much further you up to the top you're able to get. And like, I don't know, just that back and forth of doing the levels and then going back and trying that mini game. And then like, I never got to the top of that, which I'm pretty sure I was right there. And I just like thought I was there and then missed a button press or something. And I like right now I really want to go back and try it again. But being able to see that play out in an area of the game that's always accessible, but you just have to be good enough to complete it, I think is what was a really cool addition. So
speaking of the story, this is, on one hand, I really like it because it's a it gives you a lot of backstory on the characters and how they wound up where they are, and it's a bit darker. It's a more and more macabre story that's kind of plays out like a tragedy, and so you do really feel for the main character, but there were a lot of points that like this is really, and we're gonna kind of come back to this with King of Cards, but this is kind of where I started going, wait, why does this matter? What's going on here? Because there were a few points that I just don't think were explained very well. Like, is it okay if I go into detail and spoil it?
I think we can at least say spoiler alert at this point. And I think it's been out long enough, but if anybody's offended by it...
What am I saying? We spoiled the Black Knight thing for Shovel of Hope. So... so the backstory is that Spectre Knight was a treasure hunter, and he ventured to the the Tower of Fate with a friend of his to try to get an amulet to protect that friend's son. I think the friend's name was Donovan. So, or was that Spectre Knight's? Whatever. Point is,
I can't remember.
Spectre Knight's Donovan.
Okay.
Spectre Knight's Donovan. The other one is like Leyland or something.
I think it was Golbat.
Anyway, so we don't really know why he wants to protect his son for most of it. So you kind of have this vague, like, is his son cursed or something? And by the end of it, you just find out, no, his son's just kind of reckless. And it's like, well, that sounds like a parenting problem to me.
Yeah.
Like, you should just go home and parent your child instead of running off, leaving your child alone to go die in some godforsaken tower.
In the words of Guile from Street Fighter.
The famous theologian.
Yes, the famous theologian Guile from Street Fighter. Go home and be a family man.
Amen.
Even if you're a woman, go home and be a family man.
So it didn't, like, this. There were elements, like, the whole time I was playing it, there were just these, like, little questions constantly in the back of my head that were distracting me from it. And that's, sometimes questions, like, really motivate you, and sometimes they actually actively sap some of your enjoyment out of a story. And I would say in this case, it left me kind of scratching my head and going, wait, what's going on here? So I think that the writing, they kind of dropped the ball a little bit.
I remember liking the story, but I only played through it once, and I don't remember... I just remember, like, being invested, but, like, as far as, like, the storytelling and the actual story, I remember very little of what you said. Like, I remember, like, bits and pieces, but it's something that I'd need to really play through again to even speak about. So
yeah, and I don't want to imply that I didn't enjoy the story, because I was invested in it. Like, I did like the sort of the tragedy element of it. I just personally, I couldn't, I don't know, I just thought, like, there were some plot holes in it. It was constantly just like, okay, they're going to answer this, right? And by the end of it, the answer they provided was not satisfactory.
Plot holes like backwards flowing rivers?
No, I'm just thinking Glenn now sounds like the 50-year-old Star Wars fan talking about the prequels. So... I love to see the progression. This is great. And King of Cards will be like him talking about the sequel trilogy. I can't wait. Are we good to go to King of Cards now?
I think so.
Okay.
Do we all give Spectre of Torment a thumbs up?
Oh yeah, like, despite my being a little bit confused throughout the story, still a great game. Story, honestly, I liked it better than Plague of Shadows. Even then, because at the very least, it was something that I haven't seen a million times.
Yeah,
the awkward bumbling nerd trying to get the girl. I play video games to escape reality. Thank you very much.
All right, we've got King Knight's campaign, King of Cards. This is the latest and biggest update that they've done yet. Simeon's going to play it later, so chime in with questions if you have any, but I don't want to start this time. Glenn, what did you think about it?
I think King Knight is honestly the most fun to control of any of the characters. Like the dash mechanic and then bouncing off walls and bouncing off enemies and then dashing into enemies to bounce off them and all of that. Like the rhythm you get into and how they like set up some levels to be just puzzles straight up, like you have to figure out very quickly what sequence of events you want to execute. I think that is a ton of fun. So King Knight is probably the most fun to play. I would say probably the items, and I'm going into a lot of detail here because it's the most recent one and I remember it. But the items I would say were probably some of the least interesting. There were many that I just hardly ever used.
Oh, so there's more than 4 because that's all I got.
Yeah, there's a lot of items that just, I got all the items for the sake of it. And that's the interesting thing is like they make it so that you kind of have to choose between do I want more health and more magic so that I can use my items a lot, or do I want a wider variety of items? So there's this very interesting balancing thing because they... especially if you're not playing the actual card game, which I'll get into in a second. The actual card game, you're not going to have a lot of these little, what do they call it, like merit medals to spend on upgrades.
Yeah.
So now would be a good time. The card game, I liked it, though I did find myself like sort of avoiding it and then coming back to it and playing it in short bursts. It's one of those things that like I know this is probably going to come across as hard to believe just because I'm kind of an analytical person by nature, but I'm not good at games like chess or checkers. For whatever reason, I get really impatient in games like that, which is weird because I love games that emphasize like long-term thinking and strategy like the Total War games.
Yeah.
So I had a hard time getting used to it, but it's one of those things where if you like you sit back and you really just learn to kind of relax and examine the board, it's actually a pretty fun game. Again, I'm not terribly great at games like that, so I couldn't really I didn't really enjoy it except in small bursts, but the aspect of like trying to figure out how to build a deck and what strategies to employ and looking at all of them was I thought it was fun. It's definitely a diversion in my opinion. I think maybe they put a little bit too much emphasis on it, but I enjoyed it. Honestly, like the if you don't like the card game, I highly recommend you at the very least go to find the frog in every card house and do the like the win in one move puzzles, because those are very fun, even if you're not a huge fan of the card game, because that's very much just sitting down and looking at it. But yeah, it's one of those things that you really don't start to enjoy it until you actually learn it enough to realize, oh, okay, this is about forcing my opponent into making moves that benefit me instead of just trying to snatch the jewels that you're trying to collect as soon as possible.
Right.
Yeah, so it's like it is one of the most passive-aggressive card games I've ever played, because it's like, no, I don't want to win. I want you to lose. I want you to make me win. It's
That sounds like it's going to be a lot of fun for me to play. I'm going to enjoy that if that's what it's like.
Yeah, so basically, my tip to you is try to never be the first person to grab a jewel, because you're going to lose it as soon as that happens. What you want to do is you want to set up the board so that the opponent is forced to move your cards onto the jewels. Or you can move a character onto a jewel and get them locked into a position where they can't be moved away from it. So again, it's a very passive-aggressive game.
Well, I'm sad to say that I was not a fan of King of Cards or the card game Joustus, which is really unfortunate because I love Yacht Club games. I've met them a handful of times. They've been working on King of Cards for years. I mean, I played it at PAX 2017 and 2018, and I could have played it on 2019 if I went. So they really spent a lot of time. They made this game quite large. It's got 4 screens to the overworld, or 3.5 really. The last one's kind of just Bowser World type boss thing. But I didn't like how they broke up the levels into so many small chunks.
Really?
Because it was, yeah. I liked how they used to be themed to the boss and certain enemies and certain biomes, if you will. But instead it's kind of this, like they chopped all the levels up, jumbled it into a bag, and spilled it out across the overworld. All different kinds of themes and enemies just mixed in. And super short as well. But it's like so many short bite-sized pieces that the game still felt really long. Like I was kind of slogging through it. So part of this is my preference in gaming, and part of it is just how I'm playing games lately. I'm really enjoying beating games, getting stuff off my backlog and things like that. So I wasn't actually excited that a game that I had already beat, Treasure Trove, was updated with more stuff to do. And it's like, this is already kind of marked off my backlog, but now it's back on. And
so you were already coming in with kind of a pessimistic attitude.
yeah.
Well, and I'll confess, I actually kind of went in with that attitude too. It's like, oh right, now that's out. I should probably play it, shouldn't I?
Yeah, which is why if it was the Spectre of Torment approach, it was very streamlined, then I would have liked it more. But then they also put in the card game mode, which it was just like, why would I want to do this? This is the exact opposite of the kind of gameplay that I'm booting up Shovel Knight for. I want platforming. I want, instant gratification. I don't want to unlock cards. Oh, this one has a left arrow and an up arrow. Great. Let me really strategize about what kind of deck I'm going to build. That was just not for me.
Yeah, and something I should point out is that after like the first card house, because each world has a place where you can go to play cards against various opponents. After that, you basically never have to touch the card game again. So if you're thinking about picking up King of Cards and it's like, oh, but I don't really like strategic card games or deck building or whatever. Don't worry, that's only there for a little bit, and the first few aren't terribly difficult if you, again, just don't rush your decisions. I would say I actually really like the fact that the levels were shorter. I do admit it does reduce the cohesion quite a bit, but I like the shorter levels because I thought Shovel Knight, like I said, my biggest issue with Shovel Knight is I thought many of the levels were a little bit too long.
Yeah.
Though it is one of those things where I can understand how it kind of tires you out because now there's so many more levels, it is really easy to go, like to beat a level and go, oh wait, but I still have so many more left to clear.
Yep, exactly. And I think I missed a lot of those items just by skipping the optional paths on the overworld. So that's why I ended up at the last boss with only 4 items. And 2 of them were one use only. I'm like, what?
Yeah, and for context, I actually did beat all of the card houses and find all of the secret exits and stuff. I have not beaten all of the card games, but I did beat like the super hard optional boss, which, oh boy, that was that was not fun.
Was that a card game?
It's a card game followed by a boss fight.
Okay. Huh.
Do you have to win every life, or?
No, you don't have to re-beat the card game, thankfully, because the character cheats just straight out. Oh, and that's another thing, is you can buy cheats for the card game, and I made it a policy to not cheat.
Glenn. Wow. Marriage material right there.
Oh my gosh.
Podcast at twobuttoncrew.com. Send in your applications.
No, he's bitter and jaded and isn't about that romance stuff. Just about watching.
Glenn will never cheat on you because he will not go out with you.
He's too good for you.
All right, that brings us to Shovel Knight Showdown, a delightful local multiplayer fighting game along the lines of Smash Bros. Simeon and I were interested in making an 8-bit Smash Bros. Like game at one time, and what do you know? This scratches that itch a little bit.
Yeah, for sure.
I love it. I think along with Runbow, this is a must-have for people with a Switch that have friends. They get to be around and do the split the Joy-Con mode every so often. It's great. Very customizable. Lots of unlockables. And I will say it could use some balancing, though.
Agreed.
Spectre Knight is OP.
Yeah. I do think that there are like characters that are good. There are characters that I really don't understand. I think the Enchantress could be really good. I haven't unlocked everybody yet. I think Golden Armor looks like he could be pretty good. But for at least from the get-go with who you have, Spectre Knight is, at least seemingly so, ridiculously overpowered. And I did not get that feeling when we played at PAX 2 years ago.
Yeah.
But when the game came out, it was like very obvious. I know that they were like, oh yeah, we've been playing this like crazy, you know, and just making little tweaks and balancing it out. That's what they said at PAX. And I felt like it was less balanced.
Yeah, well, and there's something to be said for whether you're 1v1ing or free-for-alling, because we had to fight some other people at PAX, but when it comes to 1v1, Spectre Knight can target and just home in on
ridiculous.
You. But in a more chaotic free-for-all environment, that might shift the scales. Maybe. I mean, just like Smash Bros, there's characters that are not as good in singles as they are in doubles.
True. But it's fun. Glenn?
I haven't played it.
It is worth playing, even if you're playing just one player. Like I played through the whatever it's called, the
arcade
story mode. Yeah, the arcade mode, and with a couple of the characters, and each character is different, and they have their own little dialogue, and it's just fun to control all the different characters, even if they're not characters like that you've played as before. You know, it's fun to play as the Baz. It's fun to, you know, play as Polar Knight and stuff.
So that's what the story is. It's a little dialogue between matches.
Yeah, it's a little bit of dialogue between matches. They get sucked into this dimension. Oh, and there's a boss at the end that's kind of unique, but can be very, very frustrating. Huh. But it's fun. It's fun to just at least run through.
I listened to the developers of Shovel Knight go on to the Nintendo Power podcast, and they talked about how it was great to make this story mode in Shovel Knight Showdown, especially for the Order of No Quarter Knights that didn't get their own campaigns, because they got a little bit of personality and a little bit of their due in this form, but it sounds like it's fairly limited.
Yeah.
Okay.
But it's cool still. Did
you listen to that episode, Glenn?
No, it's in my listen to later playlist, which is probably like 150 videos long at this point. I just realized we didn't talk about the story of King of Cards.
There was a story? I'm sorry.
Yeah, Scott, I was watching Scott play, and he was literally just skipping through everything. So I'm curious as to what you think, Glenn, about the story.
Okay, so I think my issues with Spectre of Torment actually kind of carry over into King of Cards, because the thing is we all know King Knight is kind of a jerk and full of himself, and as you play it, you do get to see a bit more of like his motivation, but the thing is, I don't think you really get a sense for who he is and how he got to be the way he is until about halfway through the game, and you kind of have to be paying attention. So the game starts, and he just seems like a power hungry jerk that's full of himself, and it's not done in a way that's like super over the top to the point where it's in like, you know, wraps back around to being funny. So I think they kind of I think they dropped the ball on making him sympathetic. Yeah. And again, you know, as the story goes on and he has more characters to play off of, he becomes a more amusing character. But at the, you know, that first impression, I don't think they did a great job. And it's one of those things where it's like, if you actually look at his circumstances and like, you know, think about why he would want to be a king and stuff, because, you know, he's kind of this poor guy. He you know, his they don't have a lot of money. Like, he has to go out and find money every day just so that they can eat. There's stuff there, but you kind of have to piece it together yourself. And I'm not really good at subtext stuff like that. So I don't know. I think it's one of those things where as the story gains momentum, it becomes a lot better. And it's also, it answers some questions that you never really thought to ask. In the original Shovel Knight, like, how did the bard lose all of those pieces of sheet music that he wrote? That's answered in King of Cards. So there's like a bunch of nice little nods if you've played the original Shovel Knight. Yeah. So basically, to summarize, King Knight, entertaining character. Just the first impression doesn't really endear you to him, and it was kind of hard for me to shift gears after that. I see first impressions and stories are really important for me.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
Okay, let's guess each other's favorite campaigns.
Despite the fact that two of us have already openly admitted what our favorites were.
I'm guessing Simeon's is Plague of Shadows.
I'm also guessing that mine is Plague of Shadows. Glenn, did you say which one was your favorite?
I made it a point not to.
Okay. Scott, did you say that Shovel of Hope was your favorite or whatever?
Yes, and I said it's tied with another one.
Oh.
But it's okay. I only said it twice.
Spectre of Torment.
Yes, good job. All right, Glenn, what's your guess?
I'm guessing that your favorite was Shovel of Hope.
That is correct, actually.
Yes.
My favorite was Shovel of Hope, just because looking back on it, like I said, I think it has the broadest appeal, and it's. Let me put it this way: I would not recommend any game that you play any game in this series without playing Shovel of Hope first. Like,
Agreed.
You have to play the first Shovel Knight to really appreciate what the other games are trying to do. So, the other games, that's why I consider them like sequels or spin-offs. Maybe spin-off would be a better term, because they're really trying to like build upon that foundation. And I don't think they necessarily stand on their own.
Gameplay wise, maybe, probably, but as far as everything else, yeah,
well, in terms of story, like Spectre Knight this is a prequel. This is explaining how the Order of Quarter came together. King Knight explains how that, like, kind of how King Knight's when you beat the game, you'll see like a lot of stuff of like the world surrounding the world that you go through. There are a lot of little details that you go, oh, so that's a result of what King Knight did. So there's
and you don't get that sense of unless you've played Shovel Knight first.
And like I said, King Knight answers a bunch of questions you didn't even think to ask. So it's one of those things where, again, like the bard's sheet music being scattered, and there's some other things, but so it really is one of those things that you would not appreciate it if you haven't played the original Shovel Knight.
Final words?
If you have not played Shovel Knight yet, go out and do it. If you like platformers, like 2D platformers in any capacity, this is one of the best ones out there, period. Not just for modern generations, not just in the, kind of retro throwback category. Just Shovel Knight is just an amazing platformer. And you should, I give it the highest recommendation I can.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Wow. Yep, and you can get it on cartridge, disc, on a different platform if you want to. The whole thing is complete. I'm so happy for them that they finally fulfilled all their commitments, able to move on to a new project now. There are some things to look forward to. The Yacht Club is publishing a ninja game. Forget exactly what it's called. It's developed by a different team, but they're also outsourcing work on Shovel Knight Dig. So that will be interesting. A little different gameplay, a little different graphic style. But as far as what the main development team is working on, we don't know. So that's going to be very interesting. Maybe we can hear a little something from them at E3. That'd be cool.
Yeah.
But I'm happy for them. I'm excited for them. It's a huge success story. I mean, you can find Shovel Knight in so many different indie games. He is like the hidden Mickey of indie games.
Yes.
They pretty much lend him to any studio that asks, is the impression that I get.
Yeah, did you hear he even made it into that one little indie game called Smash Ultimate?
Yeah, he did. He did. That was crazy to see him as an assist trophy. My last word, I think, is going to be similar to Glenn's, is that, I cannot recommend this game more. Like, it's not just for people who like retro platformers. It's if you like any platformers, you're going to find something, especially in the initial Shovel Knight. But once you play that, you're going to want to play the rest of it. And I don't know where I have it placed now, but after I finish King of Cards, I'm thinking Shovel Knight might have to go into my top 20. Yeah.
Oh. Yeah. If I'm allowed to like lump all the games together into one game, it might very well be in my top 10.
Nice.
Yeah. It's absolutely fantastic. My top 10 is pretty tight, and like the number 10 spot has like 3 games that revolve in and out of it. But other than that, it doesn't change too much. But my top 20,
you're gonna have to kick out Cabela's or something.
Yeah, I might have to kick out Cabela's. The buck stops here. For all you Mega 64 fans out there.
Well, thank you very much for listening. This has been great. We'll be back in the near future with another podcast episode. Thank you, Glenn, for putting these together and outlining and trying to corral us like a bunch of angry chickens. Simeon, where can people go to find your book?
Yeah, that's right. My book is available for pre-order now. If you didn't know I was working on a book, it's called Gaming for Glory by Simeon King. You can find it at smashwords.com. Once it's published, you'll be able to find it at barnesandnoble.com and anywhere else that ebooks are sold except for Amazon until I sell X amount of dollars worth of books. But yeah, it'll be available. It's available for pre-order now, and it will be released May 7th unless I decide to make it drop earlier.
Sweet. So that is Gaming for Glory, subtitle.
A God-centered view of electronic interactive entertainment.
Nice.
Yes.
Yeah, go pre-order that. It's cheaper than Shovel Knight.
Yeah, it's $5 because it's basically a pamphlet. Like, it's not very long. I don't have words in my head.
Hey, it turns out honoring God through gaming is very easy, and it fits with.
Hey, yeah.
Just kidding. No, you made it concise. You made it to the point, and you told people everything they needed to know without overbearing them with too much information. It's just right.
That's the goal.
Uh,
All right, Glenn, where can people read more from you?
So you can go to twobuttoncrew.com/blog to read my extensive backlog of eclectic and weird articles. I recently wrote an article on does Mario have a sleeping disorder?
What?
Very scientifically backed up, and I believe that one was peer-reviewed, wasn't it?
No.
I proved it. I'm your peer.
Okay, well, I guess by that loose definition, then yes, all of my work on the site is peer-reviewed.
Well, I wish I had something to plug, but I don't think I've done anything that awesome in a while. So go buy my book from the end of 2017, Spire of Tyranny, after you've pre-ordered Simeon's book. And I'm working on the next entry in the series.
I'm excited to read it. I'm most of the way through Scott's book, The Hero, in 2017.
Which chapter are you on now?
I think I'm on chapter 13.
Oh, sweet.
13 of 18, so I'm getting there.
We'll see you all next time. Thanks for listening.
Bye.
Bye.